Hi, my name is Pamela Coons, Associate Professor of Medicine in the Division of Oncology at Yale School of Medicine and Yale Cancer Center. I'm excited to announce ASCO's new open access journal, JCO Oncology Advances. As the inaugural editor-in-chief, I hope to support JCO Oncology Advances to become the premier platform to bridge the gap between accessible scientific research and clinical care. Stay tuned for more information, including new article types, at ascopubs.org/JCO Oncology Advances. We look forward to seeing your submissions in spring of 2024.
This JCO podcast provides observations and commentary on the JCO article, Healthcare Utilization by Older Adults with Acute Myeloid Leukemia at the End of Life, by Wang et al. My name is Gregory Abel, and I am the director of the Older Adult Hematologic Malignancy Program at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, Massachusetts. My oncologic specialty is hematologic malignancy, and I focus on myelodysplastic syndromes and leukemia. In 2014, approximately 55,000 people died of blood cancers in the United States. Prior literature suggests that compared to patients with solid malignancies, these individuals had higher rates of intensive and hospital-based care near death, for example, receipt of chemotherapy, acute hospitalizations, and intensive care unit admission, and lower rates of timely hospice enrollment. These end-of-life practices are potentially even more important for older patients, as they are more likely to be frail, and intensive therapies are in turn more likely to be accompanied by significant toxicity. While hospice enrollment and other measures of quality end-of-life care have recently been studied for older patients with hematologic cancers such as lymphoma and myelodysplastic syndromes, less is known about end-of-life care for older adults with AML. A recent study by El-Jawari and colleagues utilized medical record review to assess healthcare utilization for patients 60 or older diagnosed with AML from 2005 to 2011. During a minimum follow-up of 2 years, 290 of 330 patients, or 88%, had died. Those who died spent an average of 28% of their remaining days of life after diagnosis in the hospital. At the end of life, only 23% enrolled in hospice, and even fewer, 11%, enrolled more than 3 days before death. While provocative, this study was conducted at 2 academic institutions in Boston and had relatively small numbers, which limits its generalizability to other settings. With a comprehensive analysis including over 13,000 patients with AML 66 years or older, Wang and colleagues aim to address this gap in the article that accompanies this podcast. They used NCI Surveillance, Epidemiology, and End Results, or SEER, registry linked to Medicare claims known as the SEER Medicare database. SEER collects cancer incidence and survival data from population-based cancer registries covering approximately 28% of the U.S. population, and the patients included are felt to be similar to the overall population in terms of sociodemographic characteristics. Wang and colleagues found that end-of-life care for older patients with AML is likely suboptimal in 2 ways: not enough timely hospice enrollment and too much intensive care such as chemotherapy and ICU in the last days of life. While the ICU and chemotherapy findings are interesting and largely confirm prior work in other blood cancers, I will focus on hospice use among the AML decedents. In the overall cohort, Wang and colleagues found that only 44% of decedents enrolled in hospice. While this proportion increased from 31% in 1999 to 56% in 2012, even in that final year studied, it was considerably lower than the rate reported for all patients with cancer enrolled in Medicare, namely 55% between 2003 to 2007 and 61% in 2010. Moreover, the increase among patients with AML was primarily driven by late enrollment, defined by the authors as occurring during the last 7 days of life. Among 5,847 patients who enrolled, 47% did so during the last 7 days of life and 29% during the last 3 days. Hospice enrollees who died in more recent years were more likely to enroll late, with a p-value of 0.05. Because it is arguably most difficult to predict when the end of life will occur for older patients with AML who die quickly after diagnosis, the authors performed a sensitivity analysis, removing those who survived less than 1 month. In this subcohort, the percentage of patients who enrolled in hospice increased from 44% to 48%. However, among patients who were enrolled in hospice, the percentage of late enrollment during the last 7 days of life only decreased from 47% to 43%. The authors also assessed transitions out of hospice, finding that 6% of enrollees were discharged before death and another 3% went out and came back. Interestingly, for patients between an earlier hospice discharge and subsequent enrollment, 62% received transfusion, but only 17% received chemotherapy. Wang and colleagues' analyses suggest that while hospice utilization has increased for older patients with AML, much of that increase is explained by late enrollment. This trend has been seen in other blood cancers and even for some solid tumors such as ovarian cancer. Indeed, as the authors point out, the increased overall use with concurrent increase in late enrollment suggests that many older patients with AML are being admitted to hospice primarily to, quote, manage their death, unquote, rather than to obtain the other palliative benefits available. These data also suggest that when patients with AML leave hospice, most are transfused. While the authors did not assess whether transfusion dependence was negatively associated with hospice enrollment, they do report that 51% of their overall cohort had received a transfusion within the last 30 days of life, which is likely an underestimate given that many were in hospice for at least part of that time and could not receive one. These results synergize with a prior SEER Medicare study assessing decedents with myelodysplastic syndromes, which found that patients who were transfusion dependent were more likely to enroll in hospice. Taken together, these data suggest that the transfusion needs of patients with AML may be a barrier to timely hospice enrollment and may also contribute to the failure of some patients to remain there. In addition to the inherent limitations of claims data, such as incomplete granularity to assess covariates, including performance status, another important issue to consider is whether or not measures such as timely hospice enrollment are the right metrics to assess quality end-of-life care for older patients with AML. These measures were originally created primarily for patients with solid tumors and subsequently vetted and adapted through the National Quality Forum and the ASCO Quality Oncology Practice Initiative. Indeed, while a recent national survey of hematologic oncologists published in JCO suggested these measures are largely acceptable to hematologic oncologists, an accompanying editorial stressed that the input of doctors themselves is only one piece of what makes a useful quality metric. Still, for now, these are the metrics we have for older patients with AML, and in that context, the current analysis suggests we need to do a better job caring for these patients when they are near death. This concludes this JCO podcast. Thank you for listening.
For more original research, editorials, and review articles, please visit us online at jco.org. This production is copyrighted to the American Society of Clinical Oncology. Thank you for listening.